Welcome to the Third Sector podcast, brought to you by the Third Sector editorial team. In this episode, we'll be assessing recent trends in legacy fundraising and asking what the next 5 years could hold for gifts in wills. We'll be discussing conflicts of interest after the regulator reported an increase in cases. And we'll be talking about the need for female leaders in the sector to avoid pulling up the ladder behind them. I'm your host, Lucinda Rouse, and I'm joined by Emily Burt.
Hello.
Andy Ricketts.
Hi, Lucinda.
And Emily Harle.
Good morning.
This is our monthly episode where we don't have a guest joining us. It takes the form of an editorial team meeting in which we consider a few recent stories that have raised some interesting points. And we're going to start with Emily Harle. Emily, you went to an interesting meeting last week.
Yes, so last Wednesday I had the absolute pleasure of attending a panel discussion organised by the amazing Women in Charity Network. If you don't know, the Women in Charity Network is a community for women working in the sector, all led voluntarily by female charity staff. The panel chat was aimed at women in the sector looking to grow their careers and learn from the panel of female charity leaders, which boasted many big names, including Baroness Polly Neate, who was the chief executive of Shelter until last year and now sits as a peer in the House of Lords. The other speakers there were also equally formidable. There was Danielle Bridge, chief executive of Black Minds Matter UK, Emma Haddad, chief executive of St Mungo's, and Sarah Sleet, chief executive of Asthma and Lung UK. Polly Neate made a really brilliant point about the role that more established women working in the sector can play in supporting other women and making space for their career progression. She said that established female leaders in the sector need to be more mindful of pulling the ladder up behind them, pointing out that once you get accustomed and more comfortable with taking up space, which we know as a woman it can be hard to do, it can also be hard to notice if you're in fact preventing another woman who's sort of coming up behind you from also being able to take up her space and flourish. And we know that being a female leader in any sector can look very different in terms of the way you're treated and perceived in comparison to your male counterparts. And what I really appreciated about the event in general was that the speakers did not shy away from that reality at all. And it was really refreshing to hear them speak so candidly about their own personal experiences with that.
I'd be interested to understand a bit more about where that comes from and in what way women who've successfully managed to hold their space can then act as a kind of barrier obstructing other women when they're trying to help them.
I don't think it was so much about specific situations. It was more about taking an active role in encouraging young people, young women coming up in the sector to really hold their own space in the same manner that you have been doing yourself as a more established leader. And so giving them the opportunities to do that, it may mean not necessarily taking every opportunity that comes your way and every chance that comes your way to be on your platform, but maybe handing that platform to someone else. And I think in any sector that sort of female solidarity is really important because it can be really hard to know what space you're allowed to take up because we put sort of limits on ourselves as women and we say, okay, well, this is my space and I can't move out of this space. But really, we need other women who have already established themselves to be encouraging us to say, look, you can push that boundary, you can move out of that and you can take up more space than you are currently allowing yourself to do.
I'm interested to hear if you think that Polly Neate's pulling up the ladder discussion is partly about female leaders becoming more kind of male, for want of a better phrase, and therefore denying other female leaders the opportunity to kind of move into those spaces as their
authentic selves.
Exactly.
And feeling like the only way that you can be successful in certain industries, careers, or whatever is to basically divorce yourself from who you are, not even what it is to be a woman, but that there are only certain character traits which are set up for people to succeed, and those are more often than not coded as male traits. And you can even see that in job descriptions, the ways that we recruit, you're ambitious, you're cutthroat, you're all of these things. And it's about how it's, successful leadership is portrayed in the media, all sorts of things.
But it's all gendered language, isn't it? Because if you saw a male leader displaying these traits, he wouldn't be getting talked about in the same way. he would be getting heralded as ambitious, not cutthroat, and driven rather than
shrill.
And what I really appreciated about the event more generally was that the speakers really didn't shy away from that reality, that different treatment that male and female leaders do experience in the sector and across all sectors, really. And it was really refreshing to hear them speak so candidly about their own experiences too. So Emma Haddad spoke about how when St Mungo's was going through a period of industrial action, she was subject to incredibly gendered language relating to her behaviour and her negotiating manner in a way that differed to that of her male predecessor when he was going through the exact same thing. Polly recounted how during her time as chief executive of Women's Aid, she was targeted by men's rights activists and they egged her house while her and her family were having dinner. And there was also another really interesting point that actually had me thinking for a couple of days after the event, that Sarah Sleepmaid from Asthma and Lung UK, Sarah argued that the voluntary sector is typically seen as playing a sort of caring role and therefore is often viewed through a very gendered lens. And I thought this was so interesting because we know that women make up the majority of the sector's leaders. According to Akivo's pay study last year, 63% of charity CEOs were women. So these are women operating and trying to be taken seriously in a sector that is traditionally viewed as a sort of care provider, which we know is a role that is traditionally associated with women. So that gendering is almost doubled, and I can really see how that could make it really difficult for female leaders to be taken seriously in meetings with government or corporate settings, because these places have historically been spaces where women are less welcome than men. So it's really a battle on two fronts. There's the extra scrutiny that does come with being a woman, you know, in any sector, but in any sort of position of power just because of your gender. But then there's also that added element of you are trying to be taken seriously in a sector that is sometimes not viewed as very serious because it's viewed through that gendered lens.
Yes, and in the news story that you wrote up off the back of that event, there was one word that really struck me, which I believe was uttered by Sarah Sleet from Asthma and Lung UK, which was amateur, and the sense that women in positions of power in the voluntary sector are sometimes seen as being more amateur than their male counterparts in, for example, the private sector. And how do we turn around this all too prevalent perception of the charity sector as a sector of amateurs who are paid less and predominantly led by women? I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's very sobering, and it's something that certainly reputationally needs to change.
Yeah. And our discussion has focused predominantly on the challenges that lie with being a woman in this sector and operating in this space. But I want to take a moment just to reflect on how inspirational that whole event was, because even though I'm personally not working in the charity sector, just as a woman, it was really lovely to be in that room. There was such a sense of solidarity coming from both the panellists, but also from all of the attendees. And there was loads of good takeaways, but one thing that did stick with me was Danielle Bridge saying, comparison is the thief of joy. And we need to be avoiding looking at our fellow women in whatever industry we're in, but within the charity sector specifically, as competition. Don't look at what you're seeing on LinkedIn as competition. Don't pay attention to it. Focus on your progression and on bolstering other women as well and encouraging them to take up their space, because that's really what networks like the Women in Charity Network are there to do, is to encourage that progression, encouraging that community, and really give everyone the opportunity to sort of take up the space that they deserve.
You've certainly sold it to me. I'd love to attend the next event. Moving on now, Emily Burt, you have had your head in charity accounts for quite a bit of the past few months, it feels like, thinking about the world of legacies.
Yes, absolutely. I have been spending the past few months buried in legacy income data because I am personally just really interested in thinking about how legacy income at charities has been developing over the past 5 years. So we've seen plenty of headlines about the 2020s being a really bumper period for legacy giving. Legacy Futures and Smee & Ford's inaugural legacy giving report found that income had hit a record high of 4.5 billion in 2024. But what I was interested in was how that was playing out on a more granular level. So our data team downloaded about 5 years worth of accounts data from the Register of Charities for a group of 100 major UK charities, and we analysed it to see what has been happening to their legacy income over a 5-year period. And this has returned some absolutely fascinating results, including collective legacy growth of 38% for this group over a 5-year period. In the most recent reporting year for this set of charities, they generated legacy income of almost £2 billion. And some individual charities saw huge percentage increases in the legacies that they generated over this period. The food distribution charity Trussell, for example, recorded an increase of almost 6,000%. It was about 5,700% in 5 years. And the charity had really started to invest in its legacy marketing around 2020, which was part of the reason for this boom in growth. But even the massive legacy stalwarts like Cancer Research UK, which is one of the dominating organisations in this field, also saw a 69% increase in its legacy income over that 5-year period.
Those are quite staggering figures. Why is this an important moment to be reflecting on this surge in growth?
Partly it's because I think all charities need to really be looking at the diversity of their income channels right now. We know that those traditional fundraising streams continue to come under strain. CAF's recent UK Giving report, just another example of that. And there is a big perception in the sector of legacies as this very volatile income channel. That is true. And we saw some big rises in this report. We also saw some big falls for some organisations. But in the long term, and I thoroughly believe that you should always look at legacies with a really long-term view. Legacy Futures are predicting that we will see this sector hit 5 billion by 2030, which is not that far away, and that it will just continue moving in an upward trajectory beyond then. And even in our snapshot window, 5 years, which is not very long, we saw legacy income both outstripping inflation, and the rate of legacy growth was faster both than total income growth among this group of charities and total fundraised income. Legacies were growing faster than both of those. So it really feels like there is a genuine opportunity for charities to develop their legacy focus now and hopefully reap some rewards in the future.
And as part of this report, the Legacy Map, we did a video interview with 2 people representing Remember a Charity and Legacy Futures. And one thing that I really took from that discussion with Claire Routley from Legacy Futures and Alex McDowell from Remember a Charity was the importance of thinking about your legacy income and your legacy forecasts in 5-year chunks, because it is so volatile, and one gift, which you don't know when it's going to land, you may not even know that it's been pledged, could completely skew what your income is for a year. And conversely, the absence of a gift like that could make you see a massive drop in your income. So thinking in 5-year chunks as opposed to more granular annual budgets. But also one observation from Alex McDowell, who is also the Director of Fundraising at the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, was making sure that you don't artificially divide legacy income and legacy fundraising activities from other forms of fundraising, because your supporters are not going to see this difference in income streams. If they are giving to you as a regular donor in their lifetime, they may well decide to leave you a gift in their will. Perhaps we can play a short clip just to give you an idea of what Alex was talking about in his own words.
I would argue very strongly that someone cares enough about your cause to put a gift in their will. It may be the last gift you receive, but it might not be the last gift they give. And it's that relationship that is ongoing, and we create these artificial boundaries that really shouldn't and don't exist. That's not how the outside world sees us. And so I think for professional fundraisers and all charities to be thinking, how do we have a more rounded conversation? How do we reflect what our donors are interested in? How do we listen to them? Obviously, there will be generational differences in terms of maybe different causes or different life experience. There will always be different expectations of charities depending on what you've grown up with. So I think there's always been respectful and understanding, and like any good fundraiser marketeer, listening to your audience. But I think you can also overblow the sort of generational difference. If we've already got relationships with a lot of these people, it's about understanding how they want and need to be communicated with, doing the basics really, really well, and making sure it's an ongoing dialogue.
That was Alex McDowell, who is the vice chair of Remember a Charity.
And I think that point that Alex makes is really pertinent, and it's also an important part, as Alex and Claire said in that interview, of guarding against the volatility of that legacy income stream is about thinking about them holistically, and it's about thinking about them in the round. So your legacy fundraisers should be in regular conversation with the heads of finance, for example, to be thinking about those sort of 5-year scenario plans, thinking about what the short-term financial picture for the organisation might be, medium-term, long-term. And that will help you to scenario plan and to think about the fluctuations that you might see over a 5-year period. And I think Claire Routley made a point as well that when she worked for a large charity in the past, she said, it was always that 5 or 6 key legacy gifts that would really paint the picture, as you sort of alluded to earlier, Lucinda, and making sure that everyone across the organisation understands that and is involved in that conversation is really important for making sure that you've got a strong front.
Another interesting aspect of our discussion with Claire and Alex, which was all around what do the next 5 years hold for legacy giving, was thinking about specific factors and changing climate in relation to the 2025 autumn budget and specifically inheritance tax. Shall we have a listen to another clip from Alex on that?
The Office for Budget Responsibility forecast the amount of estates that will start paying inheritance tax will double by 2030. And if you consider around 2 billion of the 4.5 billion that we're currently seeing every year comes from estates that qualify for inheritance tax. So if you combine that with the freezing of the nil band rate, sorry to get all technical, plus the pension pots, there will be a lot more people, whether they end up going into IHT territory or not, will be having a conversation. Whether these things influence people is subject to debate, but what it does mean is if you're a professional advisor, you're a solicitor, you're a financial advisor, you are going to be having a conversation with your client. And we did some work at Remember Charity many years ago now, but it was really, really clear as day that advisors who mention charitable opportunities write twice as many charitable wills, and we now know there'll be a lot more. I think the normalisation of it, because of more people potentially coming into paying inheritance tax, will be hugely significant. What we don't for certain know is, will it have unintended consequences in terms of people thinking, well, actually, if I'm going to be paying more inheritance tax, do I need to get my affairs in order? Do I want to give in my lifetime more? Do I behave differently? So we don't really know what the overall difference will be. Will people feel poorer because they know more of their money is going to tax?
So a lot of unknown there. But what I thought was interesting from that clip was the importance of having a conversation about leaving a gift in your will, and how a financial advisor or a legal advisor bringing up the possibility of that really increases the likelihood that somebody will remember a charity in their will.
The Legacy Map report, which we put together, covers a really exceptional 5 years of growth for the sector. It peaked in 2024, which is all tied up in the fact that the probate backlog was halved by government in that year. So we saw a huge number of estates coming through that probate process. Claire Routley, in her interview with us, said that in 2025, in the next year or so of reporting, we're expecting to see, as she calls it, more of a return to trend. So there probably will be a fall in this next year of the number of legacies that are coming through, but it should then begin to gradually increase again. And beyond the trigger factors such as the autumn budget changes to things like inheritance tax, over the course of the next decade, we're also expecting to see around £300 billion transferred between baby boomers and the younger generations as part of the so-called Great Wealth Transfer. And in fact, this is not just wealth being handed down. Claire Routley also made that point, but wealth handed sideways between partners. As we all know, men broadly have slightly less longevity than their female counterparts. So there is going to be an enormous amount of money changing hands in the future as well. And there will be people who are thinking about how they manage that wealth and where they choose to place it. I think that this is going to continue to be a really interesting picture. And hopefully the legacy map itself is a very interesting snapshot for organisations who are thinking about legacy trends and how their own legacies are performing. It's available to top-tier subscribers of Third Sector. You can also purchase it as a standalone report. And today we'll also have a piece of additional analysis coming out about that legacy map to subscribers of our Knowledge subscription tier.
From exciting fundraising trends to governance issues.
It doesn't get much more exciting.
What is your story, Andy?
Okay, well, mine is about conflicts of interest, which I know you're going to be really excited to hear about. The Charity Commission has put out refreshed guidance on how charities should manage their conflicts of interest because they've seen a sharp rise in the number of cases involving alleged private benefit and conflicts of interest among trustees and connected people. The Commission said that they had seen a 23% rise in cases where there was perceived or alleged abuse of charitable status for private benefit over the past year. And they thought that this was a risk to public trust in charities because they feel like if you're seeing lots of these cases, then that has very much a corrosive effect on public trust. And we've seen plenty of examples in the third sector. Just over the last few weeks, we've written stories about cases where there was a charity that lent £900,000 to a trustee's son, and it was all a bit murky as to what was happening with that money. Another story where defunct charities made nearly £100,000 in payments to trustees and their relatives. There's been lots of this stuff going on, and I think at Third Sector we have seen a notable rise. So the Commission has said, well, we're just going to put out some more clear guidance, and actually CC29, which is the official name of the guidance that it puts out for trustees, has been updated.
Let's just go back a little bit, shall we, and give the crystal clear definition for what a conflict of interest is. So I did an interview with Liz Brownsell from the law firm Ricketts last year in the context of the Captain Tom Foundation, which the Charity Commission found to have major question marks in terms of conflicts of interest. And I asked Liz for a simple definition of what a conflict of interest is. And her response was any situation where a trustee of a charity has an interest or a loyalty somewhere else that may or might be perceived to conflict with the interest of a charity. So it may not actually be a conflict of interest, but if there's a perception of it, then alarm bells will be raised.
Yeah, that's right. And the Commission CC29 updated guidance says that a conflict of interest is where the charity's best interest conflicts with or may conflict with your personal interest or the interests of people or organisations connected to you. And the connected bit can be a whole load of people, not just spouses or relatives. It can be friends or even employers. There's a whole wide range of things that can be covered. And one of the things that the Commission has said about these conflicts of interest cases is that they feel like a lot of them are happening inadvertently because charity trustees don't just realise what the legal position is, and they're not deliberately abusing their position as trustees and trying to give a leg up to their mates, but they're just doing it accidentally. And you can see how that could easily arise. I mean, a small charity needs their roof fixed and, it just turns out that one of the trustees is married to a roofer, and he'll give you a good deal on fixing that roof, which might be fine as long as you go through all the proper processes and you understand how your potential conflicts of interest might affect it and you record the process that you go through properly. The Commission doesn't necessarily say you can't employ this person, but it has to be in the best interest of the charity, and you have to make sure that those conflicts of interest are managed properly.
Yeah.
It's interesting that a lot of the cases are inadvertent rather than sort of willful abuse of conflicts of interest management. It raises the question about the sort of need for accessible knowledge. So, of course, updated guidance is great, but do all small charities know how to access that, or that they should be accessing it? I wonder if there's more that needs to be done to make sure that trustees from all organisations can really access and understand this guidance and be fully trained on it, rather than just, oh, I've read this guidance once and probably never looked at it again, because that is reality.
There is a communications issue there for the Charity Commission because, as you rightly said, a lot of these cases are inadvertent. Therefore, the charities don't even realise that what they're doing is wrong, and they don't even realise they need help to actually stop that problem arising in the first place. So part of it is awareness raising. And how does the Commission reach these small parochial organisations to say, you need to make sure you follow the proper procedures when these kind of situations arise?
I think the Charity Commission is quite proud of their guidance and learning materials. Again, for our limited series, When Charity Goes Wrong, which included an exploration of the conflict of interest issues surrounding the Captain Tom Foundation, David Holdsworth, Chief Executive of the Charity Commission, was one of the interviewees in that series, and he was telling us about the quizzes that are on offer on the Charity Commission website for trustees to engage in. And he was particularly proud of himself for sitting down with some friends after drinking some wine and finding that he was still able to ace those quizzes.
That's reassuring.
Yeah, I'm not sure that made the cut in the series, but he did say it.
I mean, one of the things that the new updated guidance does is that now it's got a whole raft of examples. So basically, if you look at them, you can see, oh, actually, this might be something that our charity could fall foul of. From small things like someone's married to someone who might want to provide a service to a charity, to equally somebody who is a trustee of a charity that might be bidding for a certain piece of work, but they're also a trustee of another charity that might also be bidding for that same piece of work. So how do you manage those conflicts of interest are all these questions that need to be answered.
Real life examples are really important to making sure that people can get a grounded understanding of how this works in practice. But I also think that there is, as you mentioned before, Andy, a really joined up piece of comms work needed from the Charity Commission in terms of making sure that this guidance and these examples and these quizzes and everything that is really solid that the Charity Commission is providing is being consistently pushed out to charity trustees, just to make sure that that sort of knowledge isn't looked at and then lost. And I have no doubt that the Commission is on the case, but it's just one thing that is really important to note. And there's a role for other organisations to play here as well, and making sure that that approach is coming from every angle.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back again with another editorial team meeting at the end of the month. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. If you feel so inclined, please do get in touch with us via our listener survey, which is always open, and you can find the link to access it in the show notes to this episode. It really is so helpful for us to receive feedback from our listeners, and we more often than not do act on it. Our producer is Jude Owen.